Welcome to OECD Podcasts, where policy meets people.
My name is Steve MacFeely, and I'm the Chief Statistician at the OECD, based in Paris. It's my pleasure to host this new podcast mini-series on statistics in the AI era. Artificial intelligence is changing the way that people access information, including official statistics. Fewer and fewer of us are going directly to web pages or databases of national or international statistical offices to find answers. Instead, we're asking search engines, AI assistants, and chatbots. In this new environment, the challenge for statistical producers is no longer only producing high-quality statistics, but also to ensure they remain visible and findable, and that they also remain trusted, understandable, and correctly interpreted by both humans and machines. Artificial intelligence is also changing the way official statistics are being collected, produced, and made available. This podcast mini-series is a contribution to an ongoing global conversation on what trusted public data means in the AI age, and how we as governments, international organizations, and technology companies must adapt together. This is not only a technical issue. The changes we will be discussing are also being shaped by cultural and societal norms. The implications are not trivial, as they will affect evidence, trust, and the future architecture of public knowledge. In this second episode, we move the discussion from the perspective of data producers to that of a major technology actor, exploring what statistical organizations need to do to remain relevant, discoverable, and trusted in an AI-mediated world. So to explore this topic, I'm delighted to welcome Prem Ramaswami from Google. I don't think I need to tell anyone that Google is at the forefront of shaping how artificial intelligence systems discover, interpret, and communicate information on a global scale. As AI is increasingly becoming the interface or intermediary through which people access their information, the work of companies like Google is of profound importance for official statistics. Google's work sits at the intersection of search, AI, knowledge infrastructure, and information ecosystems. So I'm anticipating that Prem's perspective will both be fascinating and relevant for statisticians. So Prem, first of all, thanks for joining us, and thank you for taking part in this podcast. You're the head of Google Data Commons, which is well known to the community of official statistics. So perhaps to begin, could I ask you just to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are?
Steve, thanks so much for having me. Over the past 20 years, I've actually had the luck and privilege of working at the intersection of social impact and tech. My career journey has taken me through some incredibly diverse projects: crisis response, health search, cities, and sustainability. And even though these appear to be completely different areas, they all boil down to having the same root cause problem: data. Each of these spaces has needed better data, and whether you're a policymaker, part of civil society, or a private enterprise actor, you want that better data to be able to make better decisions. And that essentially led me to Data Commons. Data Commons is an open source platform at Google looking to make the world's public statistical data universally accessible and useful. And I'm guessing that's why you have me on your podcast today.
It is. In fact, you've partly answered my first question, which is you and Data Commons have been very active in trying to build bridges with the statistics community. So I'm interested why. I mean, what's the motive?
Part of the motive is personal, as I said. Each of these problem spaces, I'll give you a specific example with climate change, which is one that's very close to my heart. I think that we have to simplify the problem when we talk about it to 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade. But we know that air quality and humidity affect human survivability, as does demographics of the population, the health conditions of the population. We know that climate change is going to affect farming and water, which is going to affect employment and wages. It's going to affect our power supplies. I could keep going. Each of these items today is a separate database collected by a separate entity in its own format. which means that if anybody wants to use this data for better decision making, they essentially have to hire a slew of computer scientists and data scientists, people who went to school for 6 years, who spend about the majority of their time basically renaming column headers in a spreadsheet, which is not the best use of their education. And because of this tax, most of us are not using data to make decisions. We're essentially flying blind. And I think this is a global problem today. Part of what Google tries to do is, our mission as a company is to make all the world's information universally accessible and useful. And I think that data is a key part of that information. And when you enter our current era of artificial intelligence, which is supposed to help us make better decisions, how do we know that those decisions are valuable if they're not grounded on useful, authoritative data that you can source back? So this is part of why I think it's so important right now that we work closely with agencies like yours, as well as with other producers of data, to ensure that their data is AI ready, if you will.
So if we take that mission from Google's perspective, what do you think will be the biggest transformation that artificial intelligence will bring to the way that people can discover and use information, including quantitative information and statistical data?
If I can zoom out for a second, I think that Google, from its very inception, even before the advent of AI, has been bringing information to people's fingertips in ways that we as society have been grappling with what that means. I'll give you a simple example. I worked in the space of health search, where for about 150 years, we created a field called medicine, which was gilded, where literally the people wore separate coats, right, and had a ceremony that made them doctors. And that information, which was largely in Greek and Latin even, was largely kept away from the regular population. But what happened when those boundaries broke down, when the internet made that information available? Now, some really good things happened in terms of information access to broad pieces of the population, but we also had to be careful about the mis and disinformation that could be spread with that. And I think we're seeing that same process play out now with artificial intelligence, where more and more people are empowered with information. But how do we make sure we do that in the most safe and responsible way so that people are getting the right information at the right time? I again started off by stating that the majority of the world's population found data hard to use. I think that this is a problem. I think that we need more people using data in their decision making. So statistics cannot be a gilded field that is removed from the populations that need to utilize this data. And this is where I think AI has a promise, but we also have to be careful of the peril of the mis and disinformation that can be passed along by these systems.
Okay, so we'll come back to mis and disinformation in a minute. I want to turn quickly to quality. Official statistics are often defined by their compliance with high quality frameworks and standards. So I'm wondering, from your point of view, what does quality mean when we add artificial intelligence to the mix? And how does a technology company like Google think about quality and what's it doing to data in this new AI era?
When I think about quality, I want to start with a framework for it, which is usually helpful. I think about information that is well sourced, that is auditable, and that is reproducible, especially when it comes to the era or the area of data. With regards to what Google is doing in this space, there's a lot of work that we have done over the last 2 years with artificial intelligence specifically to ensure that even on search results, we are able to source back where a lot of this data is from, even on regular search results, so that people have some trust in what they're seeing. We've, of course, seen the hallucination problem brought forth by a lot of AI systems, and we try to decrease that in a lot of ways by showing that sourcing. Now, at the end of the day, those hallucinations still exist with these systems. And a large part of my work is how do we use a large amount of this statistical data to help ground our future systems to be able to make better, trustable, data-aware decisions.
Okay, so you mentioned hallucinations. Obviously, this is a big concern in the statistical world. So can artificial intelligence systems, can they distinguish or can they prioritize authoritative information such as official statistics rather than the less authoritative sources?
The answer is yes, but the answer is also it depends how that AI system has been built and what it does, right? In the early days of these large language models, which have been really talking about today, and I want to emphasize the word language in large language models because what they really focus on is words and tokenizing words and doing predictions on the next word. But what we've been able to do with these over the last year is create systems that are able to call tool chains. So they're able to actually know when I go from simply creating a next word as a probabilistic model to then creating a set of instructions that then call a tool, a database, or some repository of knowledge to be able to extract information. So yes, I do believe that we can get to a stage where these large models are able to know that there is a place to go to get this information, that information can be sourced, and that information will be trustable. I don't think we're fully there yet, but this is part of the journey we're on right now.
Okay, because I mentioned at the start, people will increasingly use artificial intelligence as an intermediary to source their information. Less and less they're going to come to my website directly. So one of our fears is that official statistics may become invisible if they're not optimized for artificial intelligence systems. So is that a valid fear, do you think? And if it is, what should official statistics offices should be doing to mitigate those risks?
I don't think it's any more of a valid fear than any fear that you may have had about Google being the gateway or the directory to finding information on the web previously. I think what's happened today is statistical agencies need to ensure that their data, though, is AI ready so that the systems that are learning, training, understanding which tool chains to use can actually understand how to use them. And when I say the term AI ready, I don't know if it's helpful for me to go dig a step deeper as to what I mean by that, but we're talking about fundamentally well-documented data and metadata in a machine-readable format. We want to ensure the data is well modeled, that it has clear data dictionaries, code lists, things that AI agents will essentially use, that ideally it's harmonized, that the definitions need to be consistent so that when you say a household or you're calculating unemployment rate, that we're both using the same definitions for those so that our outputs are essentially aligned. And then finally, they have to be discoverable and openly accessible. This means things like API endpoints, ensuring that they're under the right licensing regimes that are clearly published. So those four things, again, well-documented data and metadata, well-modeled, harmonized, discoverable, and openly accessible, are the four things that I think statistical agencies need to start undertaking to ensure that their data is in an AI-ready format.
Okay, is there a sequence to this? I mean, you've at Data Commons, you've been looking at official statistics now for a while. Where should we start? Do we have to do all four simultaneously, or is one more important than the other?
I like to start with the metadata personally. I think that data, if we think about the data analysis process, it is a garbage in, garbage out process, right? If you don't start with the right data sets, using them correctly, which means the metadata, how is the data collected? How can I use this? What are ways I should know to be careful about? Now, I think historically, when we started this conversation with many agencies 4 or 5 years ago, a large part of the conversation was you must give the 500-page PDF along with the data point that you give. And I think where we've come to over those last 4 or 5 years with conversations is that that 500-page PDF is also not useful because nobody clicks through and actually reads it. This is where AI systems can actually help out with machine readable metadata, where the question is not, can I give all the data, but can I show the right footnote at the right time with the right piece of data? And that's where I think we want to get to with these systems, which is why I want folks to start with their metadata and then move towards making sure that their data is, those clear data dictionaries, that it's well modeled. And then harmonization is kind of a last step to me, which is really something that happens after you have those first two in place on well documented data and metadata and well modeled data.
Let's pivot a bit now. So up until now, we've really been talking about the dissemination end, but statistical offices are also being asked to modernize. And in particular, what I mean by that is to produce more statistics with less resources. So they're obviously looking to see, can artificial intelligence add something on the production side too? So do you have any thoughts on how statistical offices can best leverage AI to further industrialize the production of statistics?
Before we get into the use of AI, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want to start with the importance of authoritative data produced by government agencies, by international organizations, not just for how we ensure the betterment of our human condition, but also for the very private companies that are producing the next generation of AI models. And I do think we've done a disservice globally by defunding many of these efforts. And so I want to start by just acknowledging that there is a lot of pressure and stress placed under national statistical offices globally at this time, as we've seen development assistance decrease by over 50% just in the last 2 years. And I think that's something that we do need to discuss societally. Now, that said, I also think that when I look at the last 60 years and I look at the technology revolution of the last 30 years, I think what we've essentially done is taken what were paper-based surveys and turned them into digital paper. That's been our big innovation over the last 30 years. And I think what AI can do is kind of take us to the next stage of this. So when I think about kind of the four stages of the data processing pipeline for national statistical offices, you have a data collection phase, you have a data cleansing or pipeline phase where you go from your micro data to your macro outputs. You have that data sharing phase and then the data use phase. And I think AI can play a role with each of these. For example, recently I traveled to Mongolia with Paris 21, a subgroup of the OECD, where we were looking at their census data collection process. And Mongolia is an interesting population where half the population is nomadic and lives in yurts or these gurs or tents. And what we were able to do is using Google satellite imagery and our image detection algorithms, quickly identify those yurts. And we're running an active pilot right now to see, can this help decrease the cost of the census data collection? Because now you know where to send people, right? So this is a small example, but imagine if we're able to, in a privacy sensitive way, use the fact that many of us carry mobile phones on them that share some amount of location information to understand population movement. A lot of the digital product initiatives out of India right now on the universal payments interface and Aadhaar, will be used to collect better economic data more automatically, which should decrease the cost of that data collection, the speed, as well as hopefully the quality of the data outputs. Then you come into the data cleansing and pipeline stage where, utilizing coding tools is going to greatly increase the output of statistical teams. Then there's the data sharing phase where hopefully open source platforms like Data Commons can help where, as a statistical office, you shouldn't need to think about yourself being a web company. What can you use that's open source, commercially available, that's out there to share your data and have all of those endpoints, whether it's the Model Context Protocol for AI, APIs, whatever it might be for third parties to access it. And then finally, that data use, because I do think national statistical offices, one, publish the data, but two, also are a resource for policymakers and society on what they should do and think about moving forward. And I think these AI agents are, again, helpful. Again, to use a specific example there, we work closely with the UN on their sustainable development goals to get them in a data commons platform. And one of our hopes is rather than one book coming out about 193 nations and what the world can do around the sustainable development goals, that we get to a point where we can publish 193 individual books, one for each country, on what they should do, because AI can help you achieve that scale.
So I guess listen to what you're saying. One of the dilemmas that certainly we face, and I think many others do, is grappling with the rapid evolution of technology and AI. It's a bit like trying to buy a car at the moment. If you wait a year, the battery fueled car will be cheaper. I think stats offices are in the same area, that they're trying to figure out where to invest meager resources and when to do it and into what, because they're nervous about investing in something that may change very, very rapidly. So do you have any thoughts on kind of what's the optimal timeline for an NSO to move? Should they wait? Should they watch? Like, how do they, given that their resources are meager, where do they make their investment decisions?
From a time perspective, I think the time is yesterday, unfortunately, right? I think that,
Okay.
but I do have a lot of sympathy for what national statistical organizations are feeling. Just to be clear, I'm feeling that with my team at Google right now, as the technology is rapidly changing. I mean, I just talked about the model context protocols, server, which I think came out less than a year ago and is now taken over completely. Or we have this new thing called agentic skills, which we've been talking about for the last 6 months. And in the next 6 months, I'm sure there'll be things that I haven't even imagined yet that we're discussing. I think what is incumbent upon NSOs at this time of great technology change, just like probably you had to deal with 20, 30 years ago with the advent of the web, is you need a portion of your organization focused on that part of the technology stack. But more importantly, the entire organization needs to undergo a massive culture change to be able to accept that new technologies are coming out, that there needs to be more of a culture of experimentation and iteration right now, and that many of the things that you're working on right now are building up towards larger items, which you may not have clarity towards. One of the ways I like to think about this is timelines are getting compressed. Most organizations were used to a 5-year plan. Right now, what you have to think about is how are you taking that 5-year plan, compressing it to a 1-year plan, but having an organization that can pivot more quickly and iterate more quickly to those changes. One of the things I would urge organizations to do starting at the top of those organizations, I would actually urge this for you yourself, Steve, is to ensure that you're playing with all of the different platforms that are coming out right now and all the different tooling that's coming out right now. I think that one of the things that's beautiful about the current level of AI platforms, whether you're using Google's AI Studio or you're using Codex, is that anybody can now write a program to accomplish something regardless of your knowledge of coding. What does that enable you to do as an individual? That's where we have to start playing a bit more and get those organizational cultures into the mode of iteration, of hackathons. And part of that is increasing the level of risk you undertake on your own also.
Okay, but I want to come back to a couple of points you made it at the start. So one was when you were articulating your vision for data commons, I think it's fair to say that you see, and I would agree, that we're becoming increasingly dependent on each other. So what does a good public-private partnership look like to you? Like from the data commons perspective?
This has been a road we've traveled on now for 8 years as Data Commons. And we actually started 8 years ago by going and meeting with, I think it was the CDC and Census Department in the US. And we said, hey, there's this thing called schema.org. It's been used on the web. It's used on 40 million plus web domains out there. We think you should use it also for your data. And the response was, here's our 500-page PDF. We already publish it in an open format. And so what we did as Google is then we said, okay, we need to prove that there's value to what we're stating. And so for 5 years, we actually put together a team to go and input almost 400 billion data points across hundreds of different sources, thousands of tables, and to harmonize them ourselves to prove that there's value in doing this work. I think what we're seeing in the last 2 years because of that initial work we did is we've gone from being on the outside of rooms trying to bang our way in to being invited in rooms on how we can speak about how we can help organizations understand this coming revolution. Now, that's partially our responsibility to do, I believe, as Google, if our mission is to organize all the world's information. But I think now that we're at this point, there is a responsibility for international organizations, for national statistical offices to do the outreach to all of our companies that are working in this space to ensure that we are at the table assisting on this. Now, the other side of it is I think it's the job of your organizations to hold our feet to the flame when we're not doing a good job of being purveyors of that data. And so I think this is a two-way relationship. And I do want to actually thank the OECD a lot. I've worked closely with you, Steve, in your capacity here, as well as at the WHO. I've worked closely with many different parts of your organization and been invited to many events, which I think has been helpful both for the audience, but I would like to actually state also very helpful for me in how I take this information back to my colleagues at Google.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, Prem. So let me skip ahead to the future. If we think about the role of the chief statistician at the OECD in 2050, for example, and he or she is looking back to today, to 2026, what do you think they might be thinking in terms of what we're doing today? Like what seems prehistoric and what hasn't changed? Like what's actually going to be the same in 2050?
This is a great question and a dangerous one because the only thing I guarantee you about predicting the future at this moment is that I will be wrong. But optimistically, and both of these are actually optimistic answers, I think. I think what won't fundamentally change is education. I think for about 3,000 years, education has been a teacher with a set of students, whether in Vedic times or Greek times, or even today in the public schools that my children attend. We may have technology around that. I have Google Classroom to see what my son is actually going to have as a homework assignment, but that doesn't really change the fundamental nature of education. I think that will probably be true for another 50 years. I think that, and I should be clear, I mean that for like grade school education. I still think, there's opportunities for us later in life to learn new skills, and AI can help us with that. But fundamentally, I think education stays the same. Where I think optimistically it really changes is with health. I think today our doctors will be viewed no differently than we view the blood letters of 100 years ago, right? And I think that's partially because our doctors have been flying blind. I think about chemotherapy as an example. Chemotherapy for cancer treatment is like a flamethrower in a garden looking for a singular weed. And as we get more precision medicine, targeted medicine, and we're seeing the early signs of this, if you think about DeepMind's recent release of AlphaFold, which was able to determine all of the different protein folding structures, every drug that I think will come out for the next 50 years will be based on that technological discovery. And so I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg on how the world will change in terms of health delivery and in terms of the general population health that we experience as a globe.
I'm not sure I'll be around in 2050 to check your answers, but we'll stick them in a time capsule and we'll make sure somebody opens them. So look, Prem, thanks a million for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your thoughts. Thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in. I hope you'll join us for our next podcast, which will be coming up soon. And with that, thank you. This episode was researched and coordinated by Francois Fontanou, with editing and sound production by Afonso Oliveira, and production supervision by Ashley Ward. If today's discussion piqued your curiosity, follow us on LinkedIn, on X, and Blue Sky at OECD Statistics, or reach out to us via email at stat.contact@oecd.org.